Hello, I'm LaDonna Boyd, fifth generation President CEO of R.H. Boyd Publishing Corporation. This company was founded in 1896 by my great-great-grandfather, Dr. Richard Henry Boyd, and since then we've carried on the legacy of telling the narrative of the African American experience. Our family of companies focuses on producing and providing the highest quality of Christian, inspirational, historic, educational, and cultural literature, merchandise, and services. We want to focus on telling the narrative of the African American experience, and we want to challenge our listeners and our readers to make sure that they're asking the hard questions. So what is their relationship with faith? How do they take their faith into their daily lives? What does that look like in your career, in your education, in your cultural surroundings, in your relationship with your family and friends? And what can R.H. Boyd do to, again, further the issues that impact our community? My great-great-grandfather, Richard Henry Boyd, was born enslaved in Mississippi in 1843. After he gained his freedom, he was able to learn how to read and write, and he was able to pursue his dream of giving people the opportunity to have their own voices heard. He founded our company to give a voice to the voiceless. He wanted to provide newly freed African Americans with the opportunity to have their own voices heard and to tell their own stories in the context of faith. And that's something that we continue to pursue to this day. Through our family of companies, we provide curriculum titles for all ages, music resources including our best-selling hymnal, author services through R.H. Boyd Publishing Corporation as well as Torchbearer Press. We also provide commercial printing opportunities, and our Vision Conference is a leading event that focuses on Christian education, civic engagement, scholarship competitions, women's ministry, and a lineup of internationally known speakers and entertainers. More than 100 years later, we still take great pride in being storytellers, and we want to encourage our community to be modern-day griots and find value in their own stories. We also want to encourage conversations as well as having clear and strategic vision by providing useful resources.
Beloved, I greet you as the chairman of the Social Justice Commission of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, Incorporated. And I salute our president, the Reverend Dr. Timothy Stewart, and encourage him in his leadership of our great convention. I want to suggest to you that the Social Justice Commission has defined its mission on our website. And I encourage you to look at our website under Resources, Social Justice in Action, and read that mission. It is our intent to join all progressive National Baptist churches together in a social environment that allows us to communicate one with another about important issues that are happening in our communities, in our cities, in our state, in our nation, and in our world. This involves a number of issues: voter registration, education, and mobilization. It involves the census. It involves the murder of black men, women, and children. It involves black-on-black crime, mass incarceration. It involves many battles that we are fighting at one time on different fronts. And so I encourage you to go to the website under Resources, look for Social Justice in Action, read our mission, and also read our 3 declaration statements. These statements made in Washington, D.C., Birmingham, Alabama, and New York, New York. And these statements will state clearly what we feel and the foundation on which we stand as the Social Justice Commission. I encourage you also, beloved, to be aware of the many things that are happening among our progressive National Baptist churches. Brother Darrell Gray running for office in the Midwestern region. The Reverend Brother Raphael G. Warnock running for the United States Senate in the Southeast. I encourage you to participate with all the organizations that are fighting on our behalf. The Reverend Dr. William Barber, the Poor People's Campaign, and other efforts, too numerous to mention. We are determined to win freedom, justice, and equality by any means necessary. In just a few moments, you will hear some of the leading figures in our convention discuss with you a reimagined social action agenda. Listen carefully to what they say. We will be guided by their thoughts. And I am also encouraging you to pay attention to not only what they are saying, but pay attention to sending us what your reflections are, so that we might make sure that we are in sync with where you wish to go. This is an effort that will be participated in by many, not defined by a few. I hope, beloved, that you will stay with us as the Black church. And as Jeremiah Wright would say, we make no apology about that. We embrace it fully. Because as Walana Rankaranga would say, Black defines who we are and the struggle we're engaged in. Black defines our dignity and our divinity. Black says who I am and why I'm struggling the way I'm struggling. Black says not only that I have a people who are sacred, it says that I also have a history that deserves to be told, a narrative that is worthy of being told. And so, beloved, I want you to know who we are as followers of that poor black carpenter, that Palestinian Jew. I want you to understand who we are as a people as we press forward. We are not defined, and we do not bow down to any evangelical right or any ultra-radical left. We define who we are for ourselves. And so I call you to reach out to the Progressive National Baptist Convention Incorporated. Let us know your thoughts. Join with us in our struggle. And I close with this as a word of advice. The President of the United States is trying to start a race war. But remember Reverend Dr. Samuel Jones from Eufaula, Alabama. Reverend Jones used to preach every Sunday that God would fight our battles. He would raise his voice to a tremble, and he would raise his hand, and as he did, his robe would fly open, and there was a .45 strapped to his waist. He said, God will fight our battles, and every time he raised his hand, his robe would open, and you'd see the .45. And the young boy sitting there Sunday after Sunday would watch Reverend Jones. One Sunday, the young boy caught him as he was coming out of church. He said, Reverend, I thought you said God would fight our battles, but every time you raise your hand, we see the .45. He said, oh, son, that's just to keep them busy till the Lord gets here. Beloved, we're going to have to keep them busy. This is serious. I believe in nonviolent direct action, but I also believe in self-defense. Prepare yourself, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. We are the Social Justice Commission. We are the Christian Resistance Movement. We are God's people called for such a time as this. Thank you, and God bless. And now on to our panel.
To Dr. Stewart and to all of our wonderful members of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, we salute you even as we meet virtually to continue to do the work of this great prophetic witness, the Progressive National Baptist Convention. It is of the essence that we have this session, and we look forward to the conversation. Again, I want to thank God for the visionary leadership of our president, Dr. Stewart, himself a prophet, as well as a gift to the body of Christ, a social justice activist who respects and recognizes the rootage of the Progressive National Baptist Convention that continues to bear prophetic fruit, because the rootage of our convention provided a denominational home for the drum major for justice, Martin Luther King Jr. And without question, we do not think of civil rights in the United States without thinking of the role of Progressive National Baptist pastors. And so in this age of Black Lives Matter, it is essential that we have this kind of conversation. And I am super hyped to welcome you to this session because we have in this session, as far as I'm concerned, some of the leading prophetic voices and social justice witnesses that the world has at this time. And so I am excited to introduce them. I feel like I'm Magic Johnson playing for the Lakers back in the day of Showtime. All he had to do was bring the ball up the court. And then there was the alley-oop to Kareem or James Worthy, because all he had to do was throw the ball up and you know they're going to slam dunk it. We have on this panel those kinds of amazing stars. And so I greet and welcome all of them. First of all, I must greet the Queen herself, the incredibly brilliant prophetic witness and warrior, Dr. Iva Carruthers. Dr. Iva Carruthers gives phenomenal leadership to the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. This conference has been used by God, not just in the States, but even at the United Nations because of her brilliant, visionary, and creative leadership. She is a scholar. She is a social justice activist. And so we welcome Dr. Iva Carruthers. Dr. Iva Carruthers indeed is going to bless us. We are also extremely excited to have our resident prophet, the sage himself, the icon, Dr. Otis Moss Jr. Dr. Otis Moss Jr., we already know is a homiletical heavyweight champion. We already know that Dr. Otis Moss Jr. Is a social justice activist. He understands how spiritual anointing and social activism go together. He has done that throughout his ministry. A lieutenant to the late, great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. walked arm in arm, side by side with John Lewis, our beloved John Lewis, our beloved C.T. Vivian. And so to have this preacher without peer, Dr. Otis Moss Jr., is indeed a blessing. We welcome you, Dr. Otis Moss Jr. And then to have Dr. Jamal Harrison Bryant. What's up, Mal? Dr. Jamal Harrison Bryant is, of course, we know, a preacher par excellence. We also know he is pastor of the New Birth Church there in Atlanta, Georgia. New Birth, under his leadership, is not just experiencing revival, but Atlanta and Georgia is in the midst of a redemptive revolution under his creative leadership. And so we are really excited to have Dr. Jamal Harrison Bryant. He has deep rootage in the NAACP. He was the national youth director for the NAACP. He served as pastor, founding pastor of the exciting and powerful Empowerment Temple there in Baltimore, Maryland, where God used him to give leadership in the aftermath of the slaying, of the lynching of Freddie Gray. Right there on the front lines was Jamal Harrison Bryant. And even right now, there is a governor in the state of Georgia who trembles every time he hears Jamal Harrison Bryant has called his name. And so we welcome Jamal Harrison Bryant, Dr. Jamal Harrison Bryant. And then Dr. Willie Francois, Morehouse's finest. We thank God for this prophet. Just earned his doctorate in ministry degree earlier this year. And again, he's someone who has graduated not only from Morehouse, but from Harvard, where he received his master's degree. And again, recently, his doctorate in ministry. But Willie Francois is not just a pastor who is doing the thing right there in New Jersey, but God is also using him to help us look at what social justice activism looks like in the 21st century. Whenever someone says we don't see anyone from the clerical community, from pastors on the front lines, the Black Lives Matter movement, I'm quick to say you haven't heard of Willie Francois then, because Willie Francois is indeed not just a leader in the Black Lives Matter movement, but Willie Francois represents the best in prophetic preaching. He represents the best as it relates to progressive pastoral ministry. And so we welcome you, Dr. Willie Francois. Thank you not only for your preaching phenomenality, but thank you for your social justice witness. So you see, with this kind of panel, all I'm gonna do is throw the ball up and look forward to y'all slam dunking. I want to begin by simply reminding all of us what, again, we are in the midst in our community of a double pandemic. You have COVID, 19, but you also have COVID-16, 19. COVID-16, 19, the spotlight has been put afresh on COVID-16, 19 because of what has happened with COVID-19. COVID-19, of course, we have seen the disproportionate way that Black people are dying because of COVID-19. We are tested least and dying the most because of COVID-19. But COVID-19, again, that's just a reflection of COVID-16, 19. 401 years where we have been subjected to the tyranny of the hypocrisy of America's practice of democracy. And so all of that is reflected in the disproportionate way that we are dying because of medical apartheid, contrary to what our Black Surgeon General said when he had the nerve to say that we need to lay off the tobacco, the alcohol. He did not deal with the social determinants such as medical apartheid. He did not deal with zip code injustice, where David Williams of Harvard says that Black people, we don't die. Our mortality is not because of our genetic code, but the zip code. It's zip code injustice, which is also reflected, sadly, in environmental racism. All of those are a part of COVID-16, 19, but not just COVID-16, 19 reflected in that, but it's also reflected in the age of George Floyd, the age of, say her name, Breonna Taylor. All of that is a reflection of where we are in this season. I'm introducing this conversation because Henry Mitchell, in his wonderful book entitled Black Church Beginnings, says that the Black church at her birth, during the evil of enslavement, the Black church, every Black pastor converted their platform into their pulpit into a platform for abolition. I love it. Every Black pastor converted their platform, their pulpit, into a platform for abolition. The question becomes, what does abolition look like in this day? In the day of Breonna Taylor, in the day of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, in the day of COVID-16, 19, the question is, what does it look like for us to convert our pulpits into platforms for abolition? I'm going to ask the Queen, Dr. Iva Carruthers, to begin this conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haynes. And I want to first begin by honoring the legacy of Samuel DeWitt Proctor, the legacy of the organization that I have been so privileged to facilitate and chart the course of over the last 18 years. I do so because he was so instrumental in the formative years of Progressive National Baptist Convention. And for us to be here and represent the Proctor Conference in partnership and collaboration with a PNBC is a statement and a testimony in and of itself as an answer to your question.
Oh, yeah.
Because one of the things I think that is so critical is that we figure out how we reimagine what it means to walk together, brothers and sisters, in a unified way so that we can reimagine a world in which we are liberated and we are free. The other kind of pandemic I want to lay on the table is the pandemic of a theological amnesia, in which I think that it's quite important for us to claim at this moment the extent to which we have indeed been traumatized.
Right.
There's been transgenerational traumatization as we have moved from the 16-19 pandemic through this COVID-19 pandemic. And I think what that speaks to is a real need for us to lift up how we transform our pulpits into spaces that really address the soul healing that is required for us to even embrace this opportunity for reimagination.
Yeah.
That's how I'll begin.
Yeah, thank you for that. You said something at a board retreat a few years ago, Dr. Carruthers, as it relates to this trauma and how it's been scientifically proven that the trauma of prior generations is cellularly transferred from generation to generation. So,
Yes.
so given how you've driven us in this direction, what would you say? I want you to keep talking about this. What would you say we should be doing to help our souls to heal from this cellular transfer that not only comes from our history, but sadly, it's something we experience real time every single day?
Well, I think one of the things we have to do is to dig deep into our souls and our theological imaginations to move away from performative pulpits, which don't allow the people to penetrate the depth of their woundedness. And so I think we contribute to, we wear the mask, which only reinforces the epigenetics, which is the name of this science, of our woundedness that we pass on from generation to generation. And so I think we have to do a mighty work of education, of creating spaces of learning, of making some different assumptions about who's in the pew and who's not in the pew, and how does our ministry relate to those beyond the brick and mortar.
Yeah.
And if there is a silver lining in this moment, I think it's forced a lot of people, all of us, to look in the mirror, to have some moments of solitude, to begin to think differently about what it means not to worship brick and mortar, but what it really means to be servants of God and to be leaders of those in the pulpit. And I think we're all walking around as wounded warriors, trying to be wounded healers, and not really dealing with the woundedness at the level that we're going to have to deal with in order to imagine or reimagine a new world forward.
Wow, wow. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Dr. Otis Moss, of course, as you know, this denomination was born providing Martin Luther King Jr., your mentor, a denominational home. This convention, we can't imagine this convention without thinking of the legacy of Dr. Booth and William Augustus Jones and Gardner C. Taylor, not to mention Prathia Hall and all of those, such as yourself, who literally took the convention to the front lines of the civil rights movement and led in providing the prophetic witness. And so I would just like to ask you, Doctor, given again your amazing career, your phenomenal prophetic insight and witness, what would you say are the social justice issues that should arrest our attention in this present age?
Dr. Haynes, thank you so much. And to all of the distinguished leadership members of this panel and to Progressive Baptist Convention leadership and history, it is just an honor to share these fleeting moments with each of you. And thank you for your overkind words of introduction. We ought to remember that the Progressive National Baptist Convention was born in danger, born in conflict, challenge, and suffering. I will not attempt to underscore all of that, but there were 33 voting members in the organizational meeting at Zion Baptist Church, Cincinnati, Ohio. 16 of them voted not to organize the Progressive National Baptist Convention, and 17 voted to organize. One vote. So the Progressive National Baptist Convention is in history today because of one vote. One vote. And that can be carried out in so many instances throughout history, literally. We need to remember that the enemies of social justice never sleep, never resign. They never give up, even when they are defeated momentarily. They do not surrender. They reorganize, they regroup, and come back with poison, with danger, with hate, and with all kinds of demoralizing strategies. I underscore that because we have to remember that the enemies of social justice, the enemies of oppression, do not sleep, they do not give up, they do not surrender, and even when they are defeated, they do not concede. Secondly, the struggle that we are in and that progressive undergirds, the Progressive National Convention undergirds, the struggle is an unending struggle. Just like that little 12-year-old boy who came home in St. Louis a couple of years ago, and maybe 3 or 4 years ago, after being harassed and wounded, so to speak, by the police. He was innocent, he was well groomed, dressed, and his mother sat him down and told him what he had to expect, what he had to prepare for mentally, and all of these things in meeting the evil forces. And he finally asked his mother, "How long must I prepare to endure this?" And with tears, she said, "All of your life,
My Lord.
all of your life." And that's where we are now. Those of us whose journeys are approaching commencement, all of our lives, we must struggle with these injustices and meet on a daily basis all of these forces and help prepare our children and children's children to be in the struggle all of their lives. It's a never-ending struggle. Every parent, every child, every generation must be prepared constantly to be engaged all of our lives. And in the next place, we are all members of a lynched family, a lynched family. We all of us are members of lynched victims in our families. We may not be able to underscore it each time, day, date, and year. I can, but whether you are a member of the family of Emmett Till or family of Breonna Taylor or the family of Martin Luther King Jr. or the family of those in this panel, there are lynchings in your family. And you don't have to do a whole lot of heavy research to find it. When I was 12 years old, our cousin was lynched not far from our hometown in Georgia. He was 42 years old. He owned 111 acres of land, a beautiful wife, and 4 lovely daughters. He was lynched in jail, locked up, because the sheriff said he felt that his life was in danger and he had to shoot him, locked up behind bars, in self-defense. Self-defense, locked up in chains behind bars, and the sheriff never came to trial. 70 years later, the granddaughter of the sheriff apologized. And when she apologized, I said to someone close to me, it reminds me of the writing concerning Joan of Arc. The story is told in an imaginary form that 400 years after the burning of Joan of Arc, the priests, the cardinals, and the popes, and all of the others got together to make her a saint, or to vote her into sainthood. And then they opened the meeting for discussion and gave, in this imaginary situation, Joan of Arc an opportunity to respond to her being elevated to sainthood. And she raised a phenomenal, indicting, and spiritual question. Can you unburn me? That question comes before America every day. Can you unlynch us? Can you unburn us? Can you unassassinate us? That's the agenda we have to work on day by day. And I'm just honored to be on this panel this hour with Progressive National Baptist Convention, thanks to the moderator and fellow panelists, as we raise the question on a daily basis, can you unlynch God's children? That's our assignment.
Wow. Kind of just need to let that simmer. That's powerful. Thank you so much, Doc. So Dr. Bryant, given that wisdom, that prophetic insight that we just received, can you unburn us? The struggle is basically in this country eternal. And of course, it's been exacerbated during COVID-19. And now COVID-19 is disproportionately killing our communities because of the social determinants we alluded to earlier. What now is the role? What can the Black church? You're in Georgia. I don't need to say anything to you about your governor, who's declared war on your city and your mayor. You're in Georgia with a governor who basically stole his way to the governorship. And now he's presiding over COVID-19. And there's so much that goes with this. From in Florida, they're talking about forcing schools to open. Disproportionately, we're not getting tested. So what is the role of the Black church in COVID-19 as it relates to protecting our community so we fight to be unburned, unlynched, and unassassinated?
First, thank you, Dr. Haynes, for allowing me the privilege to share and to think out loud. This is my debutante ball as a Baptist, AME my whole life. So this is my first dance, and I'm appreciative just to be a part. Before I go forward, Dr. Haynes, I have to pause because in the last 3 months, we have lost Dr. Joseph Lowry, C.T. Vivian, and the Honorable John Lewis. So I don't take lightly being on the platform with Dr. Otis Moss,
right?
Knowing that he and Ambassador Andy Young are the last of that group. And so to have one of the pillars of the movement on with us, I'm humbled and honored, sir, just to be on the platform with you. I want to piggyback on Dr. Moss's statement, can you unlynch us? And the answer, as the question is rhetorical, is resoundingly no. But I think our responsibility, Dr. I, is to at least cut the rope down. They can't unlynch us, but they're letting the body just swing. And so now here we are in August, and the body of Breonna is still swinging in the air because we haven't cut the rope down.
Right.
We still haven't had the police officers stand trial for Ahmaud or for George Floyd, and they're hoping to tire us out. We got to figure out how to cut this rope down with voter suppression now in our backyard with what we just witnessed recently in Kentucky and Alabama, where they're minimizing polling stations for African Americans. We are just, Willie, just 2 steps away from counting bubbles out of a soap before it is that we're able to vote. Most of my life as a product of the NAACP has been on voter registration, get out to vote, voter education. This is my very first time in this civil rights fight advocating for early voting and absentee voting. Those are not models that I have, but now that we're going to have to push as they are shrewdly and diabolically trying to figure out how to use COVID to their advantage in this election cycle. We've got several areas that are so critical. We just funeralized Dr. Vivian and Representative Lewis, both of whom were ordained clergy. And what they modeled for us is that their platform was the pavement. If you do a Google image search of both C.T. Vivian and John Lewis, the photos you will find of them will not be behind a podium, will not be holding a microphone, but they understood that their microphone was Montgomery. So I think that the charge for us in this hour has been expedited because of COVID to come outside of the 4 walls and to really prophetically cry loud and spare not. You talked about medical apartheid that is really being pushed through because of my governor here in Georgia, who is suing my mayor for asking us to wear masks. And if you can even imagine this, Dr. Carruthers, he just last month, July, filed an injunction to block the mayor of Atlanta from having press conferences, saying that she should be able to speak to the crisis, that he should be the lone and the singular voice. And so how it is that we do this whole balancing act of Cirque du Soleil, of trying to pick, do we fight COVID or corruption? This is a glaring reminder that Black people don't have the luxury of choosing one fight, that we've got to deal with several at the same time. Now, in order for us to cut down that rope necessitates a knife. And so we've got to use the sharp sword of the Spirit to be able to advance our cause. And regrettably, we are preaching a passive-aggressive gospel that doesn't really expose God militaristic, that this is not a kumbaya moment, but this is really the fight of our lives of what is going to happen. We got to deal with, I'm grateful Dr. Francois just graduated, but the church is going to have to wrestle with the idea that an entire class graduated to the next grade with no proof of proficiency. We got to put in place that none of them took any standardized tests. None of them had access to SATs. We got to deal with this distance learning, and nobody is discussing the digital divide. I just canceled last week, Willie, our church was pulling together a back to school project, and I just canceled it and said, why are we giving out backpacks to Negroes going to the living room? What they need is hotspots and Wi-Fi and laptops, and none of that is being provided. We're not talking about the throngs of our young people who are now on special education and what will happen for them. We're not giving any discussion that we are trusting homeschooling to parents who didn't go to PTA. And so we've got a whole lot of things that we have to unpack. So the protesting, the fight and the quest for justice cannot be limited to just police brutality. But what you're talking about with medical apartheid, the digital divide, food insecurity, economic issues, all of that. August, the month that Progressive is meeting, if you all can handle this, is going to be the largest evictions of Americans in over 40 years. The largest evictions. Last night, ordinarily, if we were at the Progressive convention physically, all of us would have been coming downstairs from the hotel and met in the lobby and then went to whatever ballroom they told us this panel was going in. We're doing it virtually because of COVID. Last night in America, 1.3 million people slept in their car. Cornel West talks about America being the only place where you have the working poor, that you've got a 40-hour job and still don't have enough to sustain your family. And so, no, we cannot unlynch, unmaim, or uncastrate, but we can do something to cut the knife, cut the rope down, and figure out, is there still vital signs for those who have been strung up? And we're finding ourselves in Ezekiel's daydream. Can we live? And only God knows at this point. But I'm believing that a generation like Dr. Francois is hyperventilating on millennials and Gen Xers and Zs, that there is possibility because we don't want to really wake up in Vietnam flashbacks, having to go through the exact same thing again. I wish at my highest level that Dr. Moss was on today to tell us how things used to be. I shudder that this is just a run-on sentence, that we are still dealing with the exact same thing here in 2020.
My Lord, my Lord. Well, thank you so much for that. Dr. Francois, Dr. Bryant just listed for us many of the current challenges that are, again, a run-on sentence for what it means to be Black in the United States of America. And again, you're talking about the digital divide, internet inequality. You're talking about kids going to school or not. If they do go to school, they may be walking into a death hotspot that they then bring home. If they don't go to school, what kinds of wraparound services will they miss out on? Because many children in Dallas, where I am, depend on school for breakfast and for lunch. And we can call the roll. So COVID-19 is exposing, as Bishop William Barber says, so many of the breakages, the fissures in society. I want to ask you, Dr. Francois, given these challenges of COVID-19, what kinds of practical things can you share with this progressive audience of pastors, of lay leaders? What kinds of practical things can they do in their respective churches, in their respective locales, to address these COVID-19 issues that are run-on sentences from COVID-19?
Thank you, Dr. Haynes, for your leadership here and to the Progressive Convention for the foresight of gathering this cadre of thinkers and liberationists. I think that what needs to be underscored is that the profound trauma that this pandemic, this public health pandemic, has inflicted upon non-white bodies, non-white communities, is because of the pre-existing conditions in our economic body, right? There's something in the economic body of America that has always been defined by the exploitation of Black labor, the exploitation of Black genius, and the attempted genocide of non-white bodies, whether there's those African bodies that were transported here and seasoned in very terroristic ways across the Atlantic, or those native, those indigenous bodies that saw this land as sacred and developed it in ways that white Europeans have never been able to develop land. So there has to be this acknowledgement of the pre-existing conditions in our economic bodies that are related to the pre-existing conditions in the individual bodies that have made us deeply vulnerable to this pandemic and to this virus. There's some, I mean, just simply, I think that churches, although churches are not assembled in this moment, that we are still activated to do the work of democracy first responding. Is that as Black Christians, as Black folk, we have always been the chief defenders of democracy, and we have been the only first responders of democracy as people have been victimized by this experiment that has looked more like kleptocracy than it has been a democracy. And it has been the Black church that has, at Black churches, unnamed women and children and some brothers who have gotten some shine, that have always been protecting and guaranteeing that America can be what it says it is on paper. So one of the very practical things that churches can do, that Black churches can do particularly, is to reclaim that heritage of first responders of democracy. It is because of the Black church that we had the Voting Rights Act of 65. It's because of the Black church that we had Civil Rights Act of 64. It's because of the Black church even that we had the Fair Housing Act of 68. It's the Black church that has animated and realized the democratic imagination of this nation that did not start as a democracy, but started as a colonial imperialist project that lived on stolen land and stolen labor. And so part of what we have to do is reclaim our role in policy advocacy. And policy advocacy can start even while we are at home. There's so many platforms that have been created, whether it's Outvote that helps us to organize and move people to the polls, whether it is social media that allows us to launch messages around the process for mail-in voting, right? Or whether it's the role that we must take in convincing and insisting that Black people, that Black and brown people and poor folk fill out the census. Like these are things that are deeply practical, engaging our elected officials. Like it's hard to say that we as churches are interested in anti-poverty when we don't know our state legislators and we don't know our congressional representatives, right? It's hard to say that we're interested in decarceration. Right now in New Jersey, we have been demanding that Governor Murphy, who presides over one of the most liberal progressive states in the union, but has the greatest racial disparity in incarceration. And that we are noticing that the most impacted population by COVID-19 is our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated, who are being warehoused in what are petri dishes, cauldrons of the virus because of lack of ventilation, lack of sanitation, a lack of the capacity to distance, right? The lack of how we see humanity. So one of the first things that we must do practically is to figure out, how do we now reclaim the responsibility of putting pressure on our elected officials to push forward an equity agenda that honors the fact that there are pre-existing economic conditions that is exaggerating this crisis, and realizing that I'm with Dr. Bryant, that one of the key things that we need to be arguing for right now, that we need to add to our litany of things that that model equity is that there needs to be universal access to broadband internet, right? That you have children who are now at home and they don't have equal access to this learning opportunity because they don't have equal access to these particular devices and particular internet that has been considered a privilege for the few and not really a right for all. So there has to be this policy conversation that needs to happen. Now, what Black churches have done well is that we practice what Howard Thurman calls neighborliness well. We know how to give away food. We know how to give away clothes, right? And so at this point, we have to figure out how do we amplify that kind of work? How do we expand that kind of work? Because we're living with communities who are experiencing unemployment in ways that they've never seen before. I live in Atlantic City, and we have seen the complete evisceration of our economy during the crash of '08, when people were not able to come and spend in our single industry economy, and that is the casinos. And we also experienced one of the greatest housing crises because of that. But we're seeing something akin to that, if not more, because of this single industry this single industry economy that our city is based in. That now that our casinos are not open, that you have more and more people who used to volunteer at food pantries who are now the beneficiaries of food pantry. And so we have to figure out how do we amplify these sort of direct service engagements that our communities require without allowing that to limit the kind of social justice structural engagement that we have been required to think deeply about. That we are in a moment where what we need, in addition to trying to connect our seniors to the internet with whatever types of tutorials we're able to do, we have to figure out how do we connect our seniors to the internet, whether that is just developing some type of basic proficiency, or if it's figuring out how to develop the resources to pay for certain access to pay for certain access to devices and systems. We have to figure out what does it mean to connect our seniors to this new digital world. We have to figure out what it means to protect our teachers, who are now debating whether or not they should retire because the job that they've invested in for 20, 30 years is now a death sentence for some of them, because we know that although our communities are lacking Black teachers, because the profile of teachers currently, as it always been, has been white women. But those of us who've been privileged to have Black teachers, we know many of them are suffering from those comorbidities that are leading to these high fatality rates in communities of color. So we have to figure out, how do we protect teachers in the middle of this crisis? How are we protecting nurses in our schools? How are we protecting persons who are responsible for keeping the school plants safe? We have to start thinking through this idea of, as democracy first responders, how are we protecting bodies with all of the resources that we have, with all of the creativity and all of the imagination that we have? So we got to continue to do the direct civic engagement, even if that's digital engagement. We have to figure out how to augment and increase our direct service work, because we live in food apartheid, right? We live in job apartheid. And so we have to figure out, how do we augment our direct service work through collaborations, through local organizations who have all of these resources and they don't know where to throw this money at. The Black churches are, I think, are great examples of places that can push forward these resources into impacted communities. But we have to also do this hard thing, and that is, we need a cellular restructuring, the restructuring of our theologies. Our theologies are terminal, our theologies are killing us, and if we don't figure out how to undo the theological terror of white supremacy that is living in Black pulpits, we are doing nothing more than perpetuating the kind of theology and thinking that affirms and reaffirms that Black lives don't matter. One of the key things we got to do, Doc, and I'm done, is that we have to figure out how do we reclaim a Palestinian carpenter and not perpetuate this Americanized Christ. We have to figure out how do we reclaim a Jesus that understands what it means to be a part of a lynched class, to be a part of a crucified class, to be a part of an incarcerated class, to be a part of a community that lives with their backs up against the wall, being chased by the three hounds of hell, according to Howard Thurman. We have to reclaim a Jesus that is in direct opposition to this Americanized white Jesus that convinces us that our suffering is somehow redemptive and our suffering is somehow in the will of God.
My. Thank you for that. Thank you. We need deliverance from white Jesus. Get connected to the right Jesus, because God knows the white Jesus has been an instrument of terror for us. Thank you so much. I want to just throw this out. And all of you, I don't want you to be shy. Please feel free to respond. It would be irresponsible of me to not bring up the fact that there is an idiom in democracy that says elections have consequences. This is 2020, and if elections have consequences, we are living right now in the consequences of the election of 2016. We lack a coordinated, strategic national response to COVID-19 that has created hundreds of thousands of deaths. What the toll is right now, it continues to mount. In excess of 140,000 people have died, many needlessly, because of the consequences of the election in 2016 that put in the Oval Office. Dr. Moss, your son Otis Moss III, refers to him as COVID-45. And so it may well be that, and I've said this, and I think it's borne out sadly, 11/9/2016, we awaken to the results of November the 8th, Tuesday, November 8th. And I maintain that historians will declare that 11/9 was our moral 9/11 because elections have consequences. Given the gravity of 2020 elections, what is the role? What are we supposed to be doing as the Black church during the 2020 elections? And I want to push us, because I don't want us to limit it to, okay, getting out the vote. Yeah, we got that. But this is a 2020 where COVID-45 is going to allow Russia to hack this election. Facebook has basically said, hands off, do whatever you want to do. Voter suppression by the Republicans is being unleashed. What is our role? What can we do as prophetic witnesses for this 2020 election? That's for all of us.
I'll jump in. Our favorite people, Dr. Haynes, are white evangelicals, who have taught us a monumental principle that I think our people have failed in. The evangelicals, almost to a fault, have held on to principles, no matter how skewed or off, demented they may be. They hold on to principles where we have somehow or another pushed our people around personalities. And so there's a drum on, I'm not excited about Biden. Well, I gotta wait to see who the running mate is gonna be. Evangelicals, I don't care who it is, as long as they don't mess with our two pet issues, same-sex marriage and abortion.
Right.
We gonna be three blind mice for everything else. Dr. Moss would know better than I, the stalwart who said there's no permanent friends, it's just permanent interests. And so the reality is, as you named him, 46 minus 1, is that he didn't get elected, Dr. Haynes, from all the people that voted for him. He got elected from all the people that didn't go vote. And so we've got to really just show out that map of why this is really the urgency of now 2.0, and really give them, it don't matter who Biden pulls in, we've got to push it, because if this is how reckless this president was in the first term, the second term is going to be good morning Saigon. So we're going to have to really amp up our voices so that people know that this is not an elective, but this is course curriculum, that you owe this. You gotta go vote. And I don't know how much more to do it. I'm clamoring now, Dr. I, because 60% of those in DeKalb County in Atlanta still have not filled out their census reports. And they're home. And they're sitting on the coffee table and don't understand what that means and what is the impact of you not doing it and what is the benefit of you doing it. And so we're going to have what has been lost from public schools. You talked about turning the pulpit into a platform. A civics class is what's going to happen. And it's not just the top of the ticket, but all the way down. Who are these attorneys? Who are these judges? What are these bills that we're mandating up for? What are we demanding of the Black Caucus to do? All of that has to happen. Our collective mentor, Dr. Jeremiah Wright, often said, everybody who's our color is not our kind. And so once we realize we're not just voting Black, we got to vote what's right. And so that's going to happen in every sector, every neck of the woods. The NAACP years ago, I don't know if they still do it, used to give out a report card about people's voting history and how they voted on the issues that lined up with our community. If they're not doing it any further, we're going to tap President Derrick to put that back out again and give a report card to those who are allegedly offering themselves up for public service.
Thank you. Thank you. Listen, I'm being told that we have to wrap this. So what I want to do is I'm asking all of you in give me 60 seconds of how we should be reimagining social justice in 2020.
Well, I'll start, and I will just say that one of the ways I think we have to reimagine it is by an effort to start a conversation around what it means to be human. And that the Jesus that we're talking about, the Palestinian Jew, has to be situated in African identity.
Come on.
And it is the assaulted African identity that has gotten us to the point where we don't even feel worthy.
My Lord.
Which is why some things are on the living room table or the dining room table being ignored. And I think the reclamation of the divinity within is a part of the call that gets us to begin to raise that question of what is it? What is our North Star about what it means to be human? Because we are up against a system that is antithetical to the very notion of humanity. I think that's what the Black church has given. It has given us a space, a place to be human and to model what it means to be human. And at this point, we're talking about dismantling systems of economies, political nation state systems, et cetera. Even the control over the genome and the genetic has been commodified in ways that destroy the potentiality for us to live as God would have us to live. And so we're torn between a theology of scarcity, which says it's not enough and therefore we're gonna fight each other over the crumbs, versus a theology of prosperity, which says some of us are so grounded in individualism, it's okay for us to have it all and some to have nothing. And I think that we have got to dig into that well of our African identity that begins to inform a different way forward. It is a values of revolution that Martin Luther King talked about. It's the reclamation of what it means to believe that I am because you are and we are. It is the reclamation of Ubuntu that I hope that will allow us to understand the difference between charity that so many of our ministries have been engaged in and justice. which is a totally different quest.
Come on, Doc, come on.
I think also, and thank you again, we must raise intentionally some critical, dangerous questions. Is there a callous, genocidal calculation that the 100, almost 50,000 deaths, COVID-19, will mean for some people fewer voters and therefore a greater opportunity for a majority white minority coming minority white racist element to continue to rule? That might be a dangerous question. But why is it, how is it that there is so little concern at the top about the deaths of tens of thousands of people on a daily basis?
My Lord.
As someone looked at this in the dark corridors of iniquity and said, let them die, because they are likely to be voters against us if they are registered,
Come on.
exercise their franchise. I know these are disturbing questions, but these are some of the kinds of discussions that we must have. What kind of empathy or sympathy have we seen from the administration in the face of almost now 150,000 deaths? It's more than just insensitivity. I think someone wants them to die.
Yeah.
And we must raise that question and force them into responding.
Yeah.
Say that, say that. Dr. Bryant.
I think that our prophetic responsibility is to go in the opposite direction of the recommendation of CDC. What I mean by that is, as prophets in this hour, we can't wear a mask. I think that we have muted our voice and have forgotten that the gospel is offensive and controversial. Secondarily, we got to make sure we don't wash our hands of the problem, that we've got to be hands-on even if it gets dirt on us. And if we're to really take charge of the least of these, we cannot practice social distancing. We got to get closer to those who are wounded and fractured and broken, and to become one with them. I think our responsibility is to be mindful that we are all carriers of grace, and we want everybody to get infected.
Say that. Dr. Francois, 60 seconds. Unmute.
First thing we have to do is we need a theological imagination that believes in the impossible. We can't keep constraining ourselves to what the windows of possibility, of political possibility, tell us. We need to be clear right now that there are certain things that they say is impossible, like free healthcare, free college, the abolition of student loan debt. When we have a theological imagination that goes beyond the possible, we are saying that we don't limit ourselves to what other people tell us is possible. We need to decide whether secondly, we got to decide whether we are going to practice plantation religion or we're going to practice Brush Harbor spirituality. Our ancestors went out into the clearings, worshiping God, owning their humanity, even if it cost them their lives. It was dangerous to worship in the woods. It was dangerous to do ring shots in the woods. And so we got to figure out, are we willing to do work that's going to cost us something? Because ministry that does not cost us is too American. And we've been too American for too long. We need a clear strategy. Like I agree with Dr. Brown. We gotta do what our white evangelical brothers do. We need to start owning the judiciary the way they own the judiciary. One thing I love about Dr. Moss and his generation is that they knew how to use the courts to do what the president and what the Congress could not do. We need to figure out as Black people how to use the judiciary in ways that honor our values, honor our commitments. And lastly, we got to do what W.E.B. Du Bois and Angela Davis says. We need abolitionist democracy. We got to tear down stuff that doesn't work and rebuild it. Don't reform it. They didn't ask for slavery reform. They asked for slave abolition. And so we need to start calling it abolition democracy. And that may be abolishing the stuff that we think protects us. But guess what? If you really look at it, the stuff we say protects us has actually been preying on us at our own expense, because we pay police officers with our tax dollars to protect us, but they prey on us in too many cases.
My Lord, Lord have mercy. Progressive, listen, I hear you out there, even in the virtual world. You're saying, do you really have to end this panel right now? Listen, I don't want to, but you got another session to go to tonight, and I don't want you to miss the session because it's going down like 4 flat tires. You don't want to miss it, but just let the president know, let Jewel London and all of them know. This is the greatest session in all of the convention. It's the session of all sessions, and next time we need more time, because when you have this kind of panel, OM to the Jeezy, you know it's going to be prophetically powerful. And again, if we just take all that we've learned today, an explosive revolution will take place. And 2020 will not be just known for COVID-19 and COVID-19, but it will be known for a revolution, a prophetic revolution. Thank you, Dr. Carruthers, of values where we transform not just ourselves with the theological injection of what is needed by way of liberating prophetic witness, but also will transform this nation, this American empire, because I'm afraid if we don't do it, we are witnessing the decline of this empire. We are witnessing the decline of the American empire. What is our prophetic responsibility in the midst of an empire that practices, Dr. Moss, what Brittany Cooper calls necropolitics, the politics of death, where we are comfortable with the deaths of the othered? We cannot settle for that. We need a resurrection of life from our resurrected revolutionary, Jesus the Christ. But now unto him who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all we can ask or imagine, according to the power at work in us. To God be the glory in Christ Jesus, now and forever. We shall overcome. Amen.
Amen.
Ashe.